Story 1. The Templar's Last Guardian. Dr. Sarah Mitchell never expected a package from her estranged grandfather to change her life. The small wooden box arrived at her university office on a rainy Tuesday morning, its edges worn smooth by time. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, lay a peculiar medallion, bronze, no larger than her palm, adorned with intricate symbols she'd never encountered in her years studying medieval history. A letter accompanied the artifact, written in her grandfather's shaky hand. "My dearest Sarah, by the time you read this, I will be gone. This burden now passes to you, as it passed to me from my father, and to him from his. We are the keepers, the last line of defense. The symbols will guide you. Trust no one. With love, Gerald Mitchell." Sarah traced the medallion's surface with her finger, feeling the warmth it seemed to radiate despite the cool metal. The symbols appeared to be a mix of early Christian iconography and something older, more arcane. As a professor of medieval studies at Cambridge, she'd seen countless religious artifacts, but this was different. The longer she studied it, the more certain patterns began to emerge, patterns that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them. Her grandfather had always been considered the black sheep of the family, obsessed with conspiracy theories about the Knights Templar. Sarah had dismissed his stories as the ramblings of an old man, choosing instead to pursue a more academic approach to history. Now, holding this mysterious piece of the past, she wasn't so sure. That night, in her small flat overlooking the River Cam, Sarah discovered that the medallion could be twisted apart, revealing a hidden compartment containing a tightly rolled piece of parchment. The text was written in a combination of Latin and an older script she didn't recognize, but one phrase stood out clearly: Custodes Secretorum Templi, guardians of the temple's secrets. Before she could examine it further, a sharp knock at her door made her jump. Through the peephole, she saw a tall man in a dark suit, his features obscured by the dim hallway lighting. "Dr. Mitchell," he called out, his accent unplaceable. "We need to discuss your grandfather's bequest." Sarah's heart raced. Her grandfather's warning echoed in her mind. Trust no one. She slipped the medallion into her pocket and moved silently toward the fire escape. As she reached for the window, she heard the distinct sound of a key turning in her lock, but she hadn't given anyone a key. The window stuck for a moment before sliding up with a screech. Sarah climbed onto the fire escape just as her door burst open. Multiple footsteps entered her flat. "Find it," a voice commanded. The medallion must not remain in unworthy hands. The cold Cambridge air bit at her face as she descended the metal stairs, her boots clanging against each step. Behind her, she heard shouts and the sound of her apartment being ransacked. Sarah reached the alley below and ran, her years of rowing keeping her ahead of her pursuers. She sprinted through winding medieval streets, past ancient college buildings and underneath stone archways. The medallion seemed to pulse against her hip, almost as if it were guiding her. Without conscious thought, she found herself drawn to the Round Church, one of the oldest buildings in Cambridge and a genuine Templar structure from the 12th century. The church should have been locked at this hour, but as Sarah approached, she noticed a faint light within. More surprisingly, the heavy wooden door swung open at her touch. Inside, the circular nave was lit only by a few flickering candles. In their dancing light, the ancient stone walls seemed alive with shadows. "I've been expecting you, Dr. Mitchell," a voice said from the darkness. An elderly woman emerged from behind one of the massive Norman pillars. She wore contemporary clothes, but something about her bearing suggested great age. "My name is Sister Helena. Your grandfather spoke of you often." "You knew my grandfather?" Sarah asked, still catching her breath. The sound of running footsteps passed by outside. "Gerald was one of us," Helena replied, "as you must now become. The medallion you carry is one of 9 keys of Solomon, created by the Templars to protect something far more valuable than gold or jewels." Sarah withdrew the medallion from her pocket. In the candlelight, its symbols seemed to writhe and shift. "What does it protect?" "Knowledge," Helena answered. "Knowledge that could reshape the world, or destroy it." The Templars weren't just warrior monks, Dr. Mitchell. They were guardians of secrets gathered from the Holy Land. Secrets that preceded Christianity, Judaism, and even the Egyptian dynasties. Your grandfather spent his life protecting the key from those who would misuse its power. The men chasing me. The Order of the New Dawn, Helena said grimly. They've hunted the keys for centuries, believing they can use them to access powers that humanity is not ready to wield. They've already obtained 3 of the keys. If they acquire all 9, the consequences would be catastrophic. A sound from the entrance made them both turn. The church door creaked open, and footsteps echoed on stone. Helena gripped Sarah's arm. There's no time. You must go to Paris. Beneath the temple church, you'll find the next piece of the puzzle. But beware, the path is watched. Trust your instincts, and above all, trust the key. It will guide you as it guided those before you. Helena pressed a small book into Sarah's hands and pushed her toward a concealed door behind the altar. Your grandfather prepared for this moment. Everything you need is in there. Go now. As Sarah slipped through the hidden passage, she heard men's voices in the church behind her. Helena's voice rose in greeting, giving no indication of Sarah's presence. The passage led down, deep beneath the church, through what seemed to be ancient catacombs. The medallion grew warmer in her hand, and incredibly, began to emit a soft golden light that illuminated her way. Using it as a guide, Sarah navigated through the tunnels until she emerged in an abandoned underground station. A backpack waited on a bench, along with a passport, cash, and a Eurostar ticket to Paris for the first train in the morning. Her grandfather had indeed prepared for everything, but as Sarah examined the book Helena had given her, she realized this was just the beginning. The small volume was her grandfather's journal, filled with sketches, notes, and warnings about what was to come. The first light of dawn was breaking over Cambridge as Sarah boarded the train to London. She changed her clothes and appearance using items from the backpack. Her dark hair now hidden under a blonde wig, her usual academic attire replaced by tourist casual. The medallion hung beneath her shirt, its warmth a constant reminder of her new reality. In the privacy of her train compartment, she opened her grandfather's journal. His familiar handwriting filled page after page with an incredible history she'd never known. The Knights Templar, it seemed, had been founded not just to protect pilgrim routes to Jerusalem, but to guard something they discovered beneath the Temple Mount, something that had transformed their understanding of human history and potential. The 9 keys her grandfather had written were forged from metal not of this earth, using knowledge passed down from civilization far older than our own. Each key resonates with a specific frequency, and together they form a key to unlock. The next few pages were missing, torn out deliberately. Sarah's phone buzzed, an unknown number. She let it go to voicemail, remembering Helena's warning. The message that appeared chilled her. Dr. Mitchell, this is Dr. Blackwood from the British Museum. We found something in our archives that matches your grandfather's research. Please contact us immediately. She knew there was no Dr. Blackwood at the British Museum. The Order of the New Dawn was already trying to track her. The Eurostar journey to Paris passed in tense silence. Sarah spent the time studying the symbols on the medallion, comparing them to her grandfather's notes. They seemed to form a language of their own, one that shifted and changed depending on how the light hit them. More disturbing were the sketches of similar medallions, each with warnings about their dangers if united incorrectly. Paris greeted her with sheets of rain. She made her way to the Marais district, where the original temple church had stood before its destruction during the French Revolution. Now, only the name remained, marking the spot where the Templars had once headquartered their vast organization. Following her grandfather's maps, Sarah found herself in front of an unremarkable apartment building. The medallion grew hot against her skin as she approached. A keypad secured the entrance, but when she held the medallion near it, the numbers seemed to rearrange themselves, revealing a sequence. Inside, the building appeared normal, except for one detail. The elevator had a button for a subbasement that shouldn't exist in Paris's flood-prone geography. As she pressed it, a voice behind her said, "I was wondering when Gerald's heir would arrive." Sarah spun around to face an elegantly dressed Frenchwoman in her 60s. "I am Isabelle Dupont," she said. "Your grandfather and I worked together for many years. But we must hurry, the others are already here." As if to confirm her words, the sound of breaking glass echoed from above, followed by heavy footsteps. Isabelle pulled Sarah into the elevator as it arrived. "They've been watching this building for months," she explained as they descended. The order grows bolder by the day. They believe they've discovered how to unlock the key's full power, but they don't understand the consequences. The elevator opened onto a vast chamber that couldn't possibly exist beneath modern Paris. Ancient stone walls stretched into darkness, covered in the same shifting symbols as the medallion. At the center stood a circular altar, its surface carved with 9 distinct indentations. "This is where they kept them," Isabel said. "All 9 keys, before they were scattered for safety. Your grandfather was keeper of the 3rd key. I guard the 7th. But now we face a choice. Gather them together to prevent the order from gaining control, or destroy them forever." The sound of the elevator returning to the surface echoed through the chamber. Isabel moved quickly, pressing her hands against seemingly random points on the altar. A hidden compartment slid open, revealing another medallion similar to Sarah's, but with different symbols. "The 7th key," Isabel explained, lifting it carefully. "Each one represents a different aspect of the ancient knowledge: earth, air, fire, water, spirit, time, space, matter, and void. Together, they're said to unlock the ability to reshape reality itself." Sarah's medallion, the 3rd key, began to vibrate, resonating with its counterpart. The symbols on both medallions started to glow, casting dancing patterns on the chamber walls. "Fire and space," Isabel whispered. "Your key represents fire, the power of transformation. Mine governs space itself." The elevator machinery groaned above them. "They're overriding the controls," Isabel said. "Quick, there's another way out." The catacombs connect to an old Templar escape route. As they hurried toward a narrow passage, Sarah's grandfather's journal fell open to a page she hadn't noticed before. A crude map showed a network of tunnels extending far beneath Paris, with one location marked prominently: the Well of Souls. "That's where we need to go," Isabel said, glancing at the map. "It's where the Templars first learned the truth about our origins, about what humanity could become. The Order must never reach it." They entered the tunnels just as the elevator doors opened behind them. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, accompanied by urgent voices in multiple languages. The 2 women moved swiftly through the ancient passages, their way illuminated by the growing light from their medallions. "The keys are responding to their proximity to each other," Isabel explained as they ran. "They want to be united. That's what makes them so dangerous. The temptation to bring them together is almost overwhelming." The tunnels twisted and branched, descending deeper beneath the city. Water dripped from centuries-old stone, and their footsteps echoed strangely, as if the space around them was larger than it appeared. Sarah noticed that the wall carvings were changing, becoming older, more primitive, yet somehow more complex. "These aren't Templar markings anymore," she said, pausing to examine them. "These symbols, they're unlike anything I've ever seen in any ancient civilization." "Because they predate civilization," Isabel replied. "The Templars didn't create the keys, they found them, along with these tunnels and the knowledge they contain. They merely became the latest guardians of a secret far older than humanity itself." A deep rumbling shook the tunnel, sending cascades of dust and small stones raining down. "They're using explosives," Isabel said grimly. "The Order has abandoned subtlety. They must be desperate." They reached a circular chamber with 7 tunnels branching off it. In the center stood a well-like structure, its edges carved with the same fluid symbols as the medallions. But instead of water, it seemed to contain something else, a shifting, shimmering darkness that moved like liquid but cast its own pale light. "The Well of Souls," Isabel breathed. "We haven't much time. Sarah, you must understand what we're facing. The Order believes the keys will give them power over life and death, over reality itself. But your grandfather discovered the truth. The keys aren't tools for control, they're keys to understanding. What lies below this well isn't power, it's knowledge. Knowledge humanity might not be ready for." The shimmering darkness in the well seemed to respond to the presence of the keys, swirling in complex patterns that matched the symbols on their surfaces. Sarah felt drawn to it, as if it were calling to something deep within her consciousness. "The Order has 3 keys already," Isabel continued, her voice urgent. "They found the keys of earth, air, and matter. With ours, they'd have 5, more than half. We can't let that happen. Sarah pulled out her grandfather's journal again, flipping to the last written pages. He knew this was coming, she said, reading quickly. Look at this, he wrote about a prophecy. When the 9 become 5, the veil will thin. When the 5 become 1, the truth will emerge. But beware, truth without wisdom brings only destruction. Another explosion rocked the chamber, closer this time. Voices echoed down the tunnels, accompanied by the beam of approaching flashlights. Isabel gripped Sarah's arm. We have to make a choice. We can throw the keys into the well, they'll be lost forever. But so will the knowledge they protect. Or we can try to unlock their secrets before the order arrives. Sarah studied her medallion, the key of fire. Its symbols seemed to whisper to her, suggesting patterns and connections she'd never noticed in her years of historical research. There's a third option, she said slowly. Grandfather's notes, he didn't just write about protecting the keys. He wrote about using them to hide something even more important. She held her key over the well. The darkness below responded, reaching up like tendrils of smoke. The symbols on the medallion began to rotate and shift, aligning themselves in new configurations. Isabel's key did the same, its light pulsing in harmony with Sarah's. Yes, Isabel whispered. The keys aren't just keys, they're a code, a message left by those who came before. Your grandfather suspected this, but he never had 2 keys together to prove it. The sound of footsteps grew closer. Sarah could hear voices speaking in multiple languages: English, French, Arabic, Chinese. The order was truly international in its reach. But something about the way the keys were reacting gave her an idea. Quick, she said, hold your key next to mine. Not touching, but close enough for the symbols to interact. As the 2 medallions came near each other, their symbols began to move more rapidly, creating patterns that reflected on the chamber walls. The patterns weren't random, they were forming words in a language Sarah had never seen before, yet somehow understood. It's a warning, she gasped, and instructions. The keys aren't meant to be united, they're meant to be used to seal something away. Something that was found beneath the Temple Mount. Something that changed the Templars forever. The footsteps were almost upon them now. Sarah could see flashlight beams dancing at the tunnel entrance. Isabel looked at her with fierce determination. Then we must do what the Templars did before us. We must protect the secret, no matter the cost. Get down, Isabel suddenly shouted, pulling Sarah behind the ancient well as gunfire erupted through the chamber. Bullets sparked off stone walls, sending fragments flying. The order had arrived. The 2 keys pulsed with increasing intensity, their light creating a protective dome around Sarah and Isabel. Through the chaos, Sarah could see figures in black tactical gear entering the chamber from multiple tunnels. Among them was a distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit, carrying what appeared to be another medallion. Dr. Mitchell, he called out, his voice carrying a cultured British accent. I am Sebastian Drake. There's no need for further violence. We're all scholars here, seeking the same truth. Join us. Help us unlock humanity's true potential. The key in his hand glowed with a sickly green light, the key of Earth. Sarah could feel its power reaching out, trying to connect with the keys she and Isabel held. The darkness in the well responded, swirling more violently. The truth isn't meant to be unlocked, Sarah shouted back. It's meant to be protected. The Templars understood that. Whatever they found, they knew it had to be kept hidden. Drake laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. The Templars were afraid. We are not. Humanity has evolved. We're ready for the next step in our development. He held up his key. Surely you can feel it, the power, the potential. Think of what we could achieve together. Sarah's mind raced. The symbols on the keys were still moving, still telling their story. She caught fragments: guardians, sacrifice, seal, binding. Her grandfather's warning echoed in her thoughts. Trust no one. Trust the key. The medallion in her hand grew almost unbearably hot. Looking at Isabel, she saw understanding in the older woman's eyes. Without speaking, they both knew what had to be done. You're right about one thing, Drake, Sarah said, standing slowly. The keys do hold tremendous power, but not the kind you imagine. In one fluid motion, She and Isabel stepped to the edge of the well, their keys held out over the shifting darkness below. The symbols on all three keys, fire, space, and earth, blazed with blinding light, connecting them with beams of pure energy. "No!" Drake shouted. "Stop them!" But it was too late. Sarah and Isabel had begun speaking in unison. Words they didn't know but somehow understood. Words that had been waiting in the keys for centuries. The darkness in the well rose up, enveloping the keys in tendrils of ancient power. The chamber filled with an otherworldly hum as the keys' energy intensified. The darkness from the well rose higher, forming a swirling vortex around Sarah and Isabel. Drake's men opened fire, but the bullets seemed to slow and stop in midair, caught in the field of energy surrounding them. "You don't understand what you're doing," Drake shouted, genuine fear breaking through his composed facade. "The keys aren't meant to be used this way. They're meant to unlock the gateway." Sarah's voice, when she replied, seemed to echo with ancient power. "No, Drake, you never understood. The Templars didn't find a gateway to power. They found a truth so dangerous it nearly destroyed them. The keys weren't made to open anything. They were made to keep it sealed." The symbols on all three keys were now moving so fast they were barely visible, creating rings of light that intersected and merged. The darkness from the well had become a column of swirling energy that reached to the chamber's ceiling. Isabel spoke, her voice mixing with the deep resonance filling the chamber. "The first Templars found something beneath the Temple Mount, something that showed them humanity's true origins. But they also discovered why that knowledge had been hidden, why it had to stay hidden until we were ready." Sarah felt the knowledge flowing through the key of fire, understanding at last what her grandfather had protected for so long. The keys were never meant to grant power. They were a warning, a message left by those who came before, those who had nearly destroyed themselves with the same knowledge the Order now sought. Drake raised his key of earth, trying to counter their ritual, but it was too late. The power building in the chamber had reached its peak. Sarah and Isabel spoke the final words of the ancient binding, their keys pulsing in harmony. The darkness surged upward, enveloping all three keys in its embrace. Sarah felt the medallion dissolving in her hand, its physical form breaking down as its energy merged with the others. The chamber filled with blinding light, and for a moment, she saw everything. The truth beneath all truths, the reality behind reality. She understood then why the Templars had created the keys, why they had scattered them across the world. Some knowledge wasn't meant to be held by any one group. Some powers weren't meant to be wielded. The keys weren't tools of power, but pieces of a lock, designed to keep sealed away the very knowledge the Order sought. The light reached its zenith, and Sarah heard Drake scream. Not in pain, but in frustration as he realized what was happening. His key too was dissolving, its power joining with the others in the ancient ritual of binding. When the light faded, the well of souls stood silent and dark. The keys were gone, transformed into pure energy, reinforcing the seals that had protected humanity from its own premature enlightenment for millennia. Drake stood amid his stunned followers, staring at his empty hands. "What have you done?" he whispered. Sarah looked at Drake with a mixture of pity and resolve. "We did what the Templars did before us, what Guardians have done since the beginning of recorded history. We protected humanity from a truth it's not yet ready to handle." The chamber trembled as the ancient powers settled. The Well of Souls now appeared as nothing more than an ordinary stone well, its mysterious darkness gone. Isabel stepped forward, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "The keys are gone, Drake. Not destroyed, but transformed. They've become part of the seal itself, strengthening the barriers our ancestors put in place. The knowledge you seek will remain hidden until humanity evolves enough to handle it responsibly." Drake's composure cracked completely. "You've destroyed years of work. The other keys will be drawn here over time," Sarah interrupted. "The ritual we completed has started a chain reaction. The remaining keys will slowly lose their physical form, adding their power to the seal. The Order's quest is over." As if to confirm her words, the chamber began to shake more violently. Ancient dust rained down from the ceiling. The Well of Souls shimmered one final time, then became completely ordinary stone. "This chamber has served its purpose," Isabel said urgently. "We need to leave. Now." Even Drake's men could sense the danger. They began retreating back through the tunnels they had entered from. Drake himself stood frozen for a moment longer, staring at the well, before finally turning away in defeat. As Sarah and Isabel made their way through the catacombs, Sarah thought about her grandfather. He had carried this burden for so long, protecting not just a key, but the wisdom to know how it should be used. She understood now why he had chosen her, why he had trusted her to make the right choice. The next morning, standing in the quiet streets of Paris as the city awakened, Sarah asked Isabel, "What now?" The older woman smiled. "Now we do what guardians have always done. We watch, we wait, and we make sure the story becomes nothing more than a legend. Someday, humanity will be ready for the truth. Until then, we protect the seal, and we let the keys fade into myth." Sarah fingered her grandfather's journal, its pages now seemingly blank, the ink faded like the keys themselves. "And the order? We'll search for something that no longer exists. The keys are gone, transformed into something they can never possess. The true power was never in unlocking knowledge, but in knowing when to keep it safe." As they parted ways, Sarah realized that she had become part of something far older and more important than she had ever imagined. Not just a guardian of ancient secrets, but a protector of humanity's future, ensuring that when the time finally came for the truth to be known, there would still be a civilization wise enough to handle it. Story 2. The Vatican's Seventh Seal. Sister Elena Rossi's fingers trembled as she held the brittle parchment under the soft glow of her desk lamp. In 15 years of working in the Vatican secret archives, she had never encountered anything like this. The manuscript had emerged from a previously undocumented section of the archives, hidden behind a false wall that had crumbled during routine maintenance. The Latin text was unlike anything she had seen before. Not classical Latin, not even medieval church Latin, but something older, rawer. More disturbing were the symbols etched into the margins. 7 interlocking circles, each containing geometrical patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. "Dr. Romano needs to see this," she whispered to herself, carefully placing the manuscript into an acid-free folder. But as she rose from her desk, the power in the archives flickered, and a cold draft swept through the chamber. The temperature dropped so rapidly that her breath formed visible clouds in the air. The security guard found her an hour later, unconscious on the floor, the manuscript clutched to her chest. When she awoke in the Vatican's medical facility, her first words were, "The seals are breaking. We have to stop it." Cardinal Michel Romano, the Vatican's chief archivist, sat across from Sister Elena in his office the next morning. Outside, Rome sweltered in an unseasonable heat wave, but inside the thick stone walls, Elena couldn't stop shivering. "Start from the beginning," Romano said, his weathered face grave. "What exactly did you find?" Elena placed the manuscript on his desk. "It's a prophecy, Your Eminence, but not like the others in our collection. This one has power. When I began translating it, I could feel it responding to my words." Romano's eyebrows furrowed as he examined the first page. "These markings, they're similar to those found in the Codex Gigas, but more refined. And this dialect predates the Church," Elena finished. "I believe it's from the time of the first Christian mystics, possibly even earlier. But that's not the most important part." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "It speaks of 7 seals, protecting something that was hidden before the foundation of the Church. 6 have already been broken throughout history, each marking a major catastrophe. The Black Death, the Great Fire of London, the World Wars, they were all preceded by a seal breaking." Romano's face paled. "And the 7th? It's breaking now. The signs are all here." The manuscript describes them perfectly. The unprecedented weather patterns, the increase in unexplained phenomena, the dreams. She hesitated. "People all over the world are having the same dream, Your Eminence. They just don't realize it yet." The cardinal stood and walked to his window, gazing out at St. Peter's Square below. "How long?" "According to the text, we have until the winter solstice. If the 7th seal breaks completely," she couldn't finish the sentence. "Then we must prevent it," Romano said firmly. What does the manuscript say about stopping this process? Elena shook her head. It's not that simple. The text is incomplete. There are references to other documents, a collection called the Septimus Codex, but they were supposedly destroyed during the sack of Constantinople in 1204. Supposedly, Romano repeated, turning back to face her. Sister Elena, what I'm about to tell you cannot leave this room. The Septimus Codex wasn't destroyed. It was divided into 7 parts and hidden throughout Europe. The Church has been protecting these locations for centuries, but we've lost track of some of them over time. Elena's heart raced. How many do we still know about? 3. One is in a monastery in the Swiss Alps, another in a cathedral in Santiago de Compostela, and the third. He paused. The third is beneath this very building, in a chamber that hasn't been opened since the time of Pope Innocent III. Before Elena could respond, the ground trembled slightly and the lights flickered again. In the distance, church bells began to toll, though it wasn't any canonical hour. We need to move quickly, Romano said, reaching for his phone. I'll make arrangements for immediate access to the chamber. We'll need help, though. Someone who understands the historical context, the symbolism. He dialed a number. There's a professor at Oxford, Marcus Blackwood. He's been researching these phenomena his entire career, though he doesn't know how close he's come to the truth. We need him. Elena gathered the manuscript, her mind racing. Your Eminence, what exactly is the 7th seal protecting? What could be so dangerous that it required such elaborate precautions? Romano looked at her gravely. The manuscript doesn't tell us that, does it? Perhaps that's the real question we should be asking. Why would the early church go to such lengths to hide not just the location of something, but its very nature? As Elena and Cardinal Romano descended into the Vatican's lower levels, the air grew thick with centuries of undisturbed silence. Their footsteps echoed off stone walls that predated Christianity itself, walls that had witnessed the transformation of Rome from imperial capital to holy city. The Romans built these tunnels, Romano explained, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. But the church, we built something else entirely beneath them. They passed through a series of increasingly narrow corridors until they reached what appeared to be a dead end. Romano pressed his hand against the wall, and Elena noticed worn markings similar to those in the manuscript. Professor Blackwood will arrive tomorrow morning, Romano said, tracing the patterns with his fingers. But we need to assess the chamber tonight. Recent seismic activity in Rome. It's no coincidence. As if in response to his words, a low vibration passed through the tunnel. Dust filtered down from the ceiling, and Elena's ears popped with a sudden change in pressure. The seal is degrading faster than we thought, Romano muttered. He pulled an ancient key from his pocket. Not metal, Elena realized, but carved from some kind of crystal. This is one of the church's oldest possessions. It's never left Vatican grounds. The key seemed to hum as Romano inserted it into an almost invisible keyhole. The wall shuddered and began to move, revealing a chamber that took Elena's breath away. The room was perfectly circular, its walls covered in intricate mosaics depicting scenes she didn't recognize from any known biblical text. The air was different here, heavier, charged with something that made her skin tingle. In the center stood a pedestal of black marble, and on it, empty, Romano said grimly. The codex is gone. Elena approached the pedestal carefully. How is that possible? You said this chamber hadn't been opened since. It hasn't. Romano's voice was tight with concern, which means whatever was here found another way out. Elena examined the pedestal more closely. Embedded in its surface was a complex pattern of lines and circles, remarkably similar to the diagrams in her manuscript. But these weren't just decorative. They seemed to pulse with a faint, reddish light. Your Eminence, she called out, I think these markings are changing. Romano joined her, his face illuminated by the strange glow. It's responding to the manuscript. Take it out. Elena hesitated before removing the ancient document from her satchel. As soon as she held it near the pedestal, the pulsing intensified. The symbols in the manuscript began to glow in sync with those on the pedestal. It's a key, she whispered. Not just a prophecy, it's instructions. Before Romano could respond, A deep rumble shook the chamber. The mosaic tiles began to shift, rearranging themselves like pieces of a massive puzzle. On the far wall, an image took shape, a map of Europe, but not as it existed today. It showed borders and cities that hadn't existed for millennia. The other locations, Romano breathed. It's showing us where to find the remaining pieces of the codex. Elena studied the map intently. 7 points of light, but they're fading. London, Paris, Constantinople. They're all connected somehow. Not just connected, Romano said. Look at the pattern they form. Elena stepped back, and her blood ran cold. The 7 points created the same symbol she had seen in the manuscript, the 7 interlocking circles. But now she could see what it really was: a key, a lock, and something trying to break free. A sudden gust of wind extinguished their flashlights, plunging them into darkness broken only by the pulsing symbols. In that moment, Elena heard something that would haunt her dreams, a sound like distant chanting, growing closer, speaking words in a language that had no business being heard by modern ears. "We need to leave," Romano said urgently. "Now." The chamber is becoming unstable. As they hurried back through the tunnels, Elena's mind raced. The manuscript, the map, the missing codex, they were all parts of something larger, something that had been hidden in plain sight for centuries. But one question burned brighter than all others. What would happen when the last seal finally broke? Back in Romano's office, they found an urgent message waiting. Professor Blackwood had already landed in Rome, hours ahead of schedule. His message was brief but disturbing. "The dreams have started. Everyone's having them now. We need to talk about what really happened in Constantinople." Elena and Cardinal Romano found Professor Blackwood waiting in the Pontifical Biblical Institute's library. He was a tall, lean man with prematurely gray hair and intense green eyes that seemed to look through rather than at people. Without preamble, he spread several photographs across the mahogany table. "These were taken at archaeological sites across Europe over the past week," he said, his British accent clipped with urgency. "Notice anything unusual?" Elena leaned in. The photos showed ancient ruins, church foundations, and excavated Roman temples. In each image, there was a subtle pattern in the stonework, the same interlocking circles from the manuscript. "They're appearing everywhere," Blackwood continued. "Sites that have been studied for decades are suddenly revealing these markings. It's as if they're emerging from the stone itself." "The seals are failing," Romano said quietly. "Not just here, but everywhere they were placed." Blackwood's eyes narrowed. "So it's true then? The church has known about this all along?" "We knew something was hidden," Romano admitted, "but much of the knowledge was lost. The manuscripts were scattered, the original purpose obscured by time and secrecy." "Not everything was lost," Elena interjected, pulling out the manuscript. "This contains part of the truth, and now we have a map showing the locations of the other pieces." As she spread the manuscript on the table, Blackwood's face drained of color. "Where did you find this?" he whispered. "In the archives." "Why?" "Because I've seen these exact symbols before, in a place they shouldn't exist." He pulled a laptop from his bag and opened a file. "This is from a cave painting in southern France, dated to over 30,000 years ago." The image showed crude but unmistakable representations of the 7 circles, arranged around a central figure that seemed to be emerging from a crack in reality itself. "Whatever these seals are containing," Blackwood said, "humanity has been guarding against it since before we built cities, before we invented writing." A distant rumble of thunder made them all look up. Through the library's windows, they could see storm clouds gathering over Rome, swirling in unnatural patterns. "The dreams," Elena said suddenly. "You mentioned them in your message. What exactly are people seeing?" Blackwood ran a hand through his hair. "It's always the same. They're standing in a vast chamber. 7 doors line the walls, each sealed with one of these symbols. 6 of the doors are open, showing different moments in history, moments of catastrophe and transformation. But it's the 7th door that terrifies them. It's still sealed, but something is pushing against it from the other side. Something that speaks in a language that drives them mad. We need to get to the other locations," Romano declared. "The map showed us where to look." If we can gather all the pieces of the Septimus Codex. We don't have time, Blackwood interrupted. Look at this. He pulled up a global weather map. Impossible storm systems were forming over each of the 7 points they had seen on the mystical map. Whatever's happening, it's accelerating. We have days at most, not weeks. Elena studied the manuscript again, her mind racing. There's something here we're missing. These aren't just instructions for finding the codex, they're telling us how the seals work. The 7 locations, they're not random. They form a pattern, a kind of lock. Or a cage, Blackwood suggested grimly. Another tremor shook the building, stronger than before. Books tumbled from shelves, and the lights flickered ominously. We need to split up, Romano decided. Professor Blackwood, you and Sister Elena take the manuscript and go to London. That's where the pattern begins. I'll coordinate from here and send teams to the other locations. What about Constantinople? Elena asked. You said something happened there, Professor. Blackwood's expression darkened. In 1204, during the sack of the city, something was discovered in the Hagia Sophia. The historical records are fragmentary, but they speak of a chamber beneath the main dome. And what the Crusaders found there drove many of them mad. The church didn't just divide the codex after that, they were trying to repair something that had been damaged. The lights went out completely, plunging the library into darkness. In the distance, church bells began to toll again, their sound distorted and wrong. Pack what you need, Romano ordered. You leave for London in an hour. And remember, if what we suspect is true, we're not just racing against time. We're racing against something that's been waiting millennia to break free. As Elena gathered her things, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The manuscript symbols were glowing again, but now they were arranging themselves into words she could somehow understand. The 7th seal was not meant to contain. It was meant to prepare. Thunder cracked overhead as Elena and Professor Blackwood's plane descended through turbulent skies toward London. The city below was barely visible through swirling, unnatural clouds that seemed to spiral around a central point, the British Museum. The first piece was hidden in plain sight, Blackwood explained, gripping his armrest as the plane shuddered. Disguised as an Anglo-Saxon artifact in the medieval collection. I've studied it for years without realizing what it really was. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, tense but professional. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing unusual weather conditions over London. Please remain seated. Elena clutched the manuscript to her chest, feeling its strange warmth through the protective folder. The symbols were still changing, still revealing new messages, but their meaning was becoming increasingly cryptic. 7 to bind, 6 to break, 1 to wake. They landed in a London that seemed transformed. The streets were eerily empty, and those few people who were out moved quickly, purposefully, as if trying to escape something they couldn't name. The air felt thick, charged with static electricity that made hair stand on end and electronics malfunction. At the British Museum, they found the massive building evacuated due to unexpected structural concerns. Only Dr. Sarachon, the head curator of medieval artifacts, waited for them at a side entrance. Professor Blackwood, she greeted them, her face drawn with worry. The artifact, it's changed. You need to see this. She led them through darkened galleries to a secure storage area. The artifact in question was a small copper box, allegedly a reliquary from the 8th century. But as Elena approached it, she saw that its surface was crawling with the same symbols from the manuscript. It started 3 days ago, Dr. Chin explained. The patterns just appeared. And listen, in the silence of the storage room, they could hear it, a faint humming emanating from the box, a sound that seemed to resonate with something deep in their bones. Blackwood reached for the box, but Elena grabbed his wrist. Wait, the manuscript, it's reacting. She placed the ancient document near the reliquary. The symbols on both objects began to pulse in sync, and a new message formed on the manuscript's pages. The first key opens minds before doors. It's not just a container, Elena realized. It's part of a key, just like the map showed us. But what happens when we... Before she could finish, Blackwood had opened the box. Inside was a single piece of parchment, covered in text written in the same pre-Latin script as Elena's manuscript. But as they watched, the words began to move. flowing like liquid across the page until they formed new patterns. Suddenly, every computer screen in the storage area lit up simultaneously. Security cameras, desktop monitors, even their phones, all displaying the same pattern of interlocking circles. "It's accessing everything," Dr. Chin whispered. "But how?" "Because it's not just a text," Blackwood said, his voice filled with wonder and horror. "It's code, the oldest code ever written, and it's still running." Elena's phone rang. Cardinal Romano. His voice was urgent. "The other teams are reporting the same thing. All the pieces are activating. But we've discovered something in the Vatican records. The seventh seal wasn't created by the church. It's older. Much older." "How much older?" Elena asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. "The records suggest it predates human civilization. The church didn't create the seals, they inherited them. From who or what, we don't know. But..." The call cut off as another tremor shook the building. Display cases rattled, and in the distance, they heard the sound of breaking glass. "We need to get this to somewhere secure," Blackwood said, reaching for the box. But as his fingers touched it, he froze. His eyes went wide, and when he spoke again, his voice was different, older, filled with a knowledge that wasn't his own. "The seals were never meant to hold forever," he said. "They were meant to last until we were ready. Until we evolved enough to understand." "Understand what?" Elena demanded. "That we're not alone. That we've never been alone. And that what's coming isn't an invasion. It's a reunion." The lights in the storage room pulsed erratically as Blackwood's eyes rolled back to normal. He stumbled, catching himself against a shelf. "What happened?" he asked, his voice his own again. I saw everything." Before Elena could respond, Dr. Chun called out from a computer terminal. "Look at this. The pattern. It's spreading across the internet. Social media, news sites, everything. And people are responding to it. They're sharing their dreams." Elena looked at the screen. Millions of posts were appearing simultaneously across every platform. People describing the same vision. 7 doors, a vast chamber, and something waiting to emerge. But now there was more fragments of memories that couldn't possibly belong to them. Knowledge of places that had never existed on Earth, of a civilization that had seeded itself throughout the cosmos. "The first key," Elena whispered, understanding dawning. "It's not just opening a physical lock. It's opening our minds to remember." Her phone buzzed with a text from Cardinal Romano. "The Vatican astronomers are reporting unprecedented activity. Something's approaching. Multiple objects, moving in formation." Another tremor rocked the building, stronger than before. Display cases shattered, scattering artifacts across the floor. But Elena's attention was drawn to the manuscript and box. Both were vibrating now, their symbols pulsing in perfect synchronization. "We need to get to Paris," Blackwood said suddenly. "The second piece, it's in Notre Dame's foundations. The fire in 2019, it wasn't an accident. The heat activated something that had been dormant for centuries. But what about this?" Dr. Chan gestured to the box and manuscript. "We can't just... We have to take them with us," Elena interrupted. "They're not just showing us the way. They're changing us, preparing us for whatever's coming." As if in response, the manuscript's symbols rearranged again. The 7 were scattered so humanity would find them when ready. The time of separation ends. They hurried through the museum's empty corridors, their footsteps echoing off marble floors. Outside, the storm had intensified. The clouds above London had formed a perfect spiral, with the British Museum at its center. And in that spiral, look, Dr. Chun pointed upward. Through gaps in the clouds, they could see lights. Not stars, but something else. Geometric shapes moving with purpose, drawing closer to Earth. Elena's phone rang again. Romano's voice was filled with awe. The other sites. They're all reporting the same phenomenon. Whatever's up there, it's not just approaching London. They're positioning themselves above each seal location. Blackwood checked his phone for flights to Paris, but Elena shook her head. "We don't need to fly. Look." The symbols on the manuscript were moving faster now, forming a new pattern. As they watched, a circle of light appeared on the ground before them. A portal showing the interior of Notre Dame Cathedral. The seals, Elena realized, they weren't just containing something. They were like training wheels, keeping us isolated until we were ready to rejoin something much bigger. But ready for what? Dr. Chin asked. Before anyone could answer, a sound filled the air. Not the earlier chanting, but something else. A harmony that seemed to resonate with the fabric of reality itself. The portal pulsed invitingly. "We'll find out in Paris," Blackwood said grimly. "That's where the second key is. And if I'm right about what these symbols are really saying, we're about to learn that everything we thought we knew about human history was just the prologue." Elena clutched the manuscript tighter and stepped toward the portal. Above them, the lights in the sky grew brighter, and somewhere in the distance, church bells began to toll. Not in warning this time, but in welcome. Through the portal they stepped, emerging into the sacred darkness of Notre Dame. The cathedral's reconstruction scaffolding cast skeletal shadows in the strange light streaming through the rose windows. At the altar, the second key waited. A chalice that had been dismissed as a simple medieval relic until the fire revealed its true nature. As Elena approached with the manuscript and first key, all three objects began to resonate. The chalice's surface rippled like liquid metal, revealing the same ancient symbols. When combined, they projected a holographic map of the galaxy, but not as it existed now, as it had existed millions of years ago, when humanity's true ancestors had first seeded Earth. The remaining seals activated in rapid succession: Constantinople, Cairo, Cusco, Angkor Wat, and finally the last site in Antarctica, hidden beneath the ice. Each released not just information, but awareness, awakening dormant parts of the human consciousness that had been carefully preserved throughout our evolution. The truth unveiled itself. Humanity was not just a planetary species, but part of a vast cosmic civilization that had fractured itself to survive a catastrophic event. Earth had been both sanctuary and nursery, allowing a portion of that civilization to develop independently, protected by the seals until they were ready to rejoin their cosmic heritage. The ships descending through Earth's atmosphere weren't invaders. They were the return of family, guided by the same symbols that had protected humanity's isolation. As the final seal dissolved, humanity's collective consciousness expanded, embracing both its terrestrial journey and its cosmic legacy. Elena, Blackwood, and their companions stood at the nexus of this transformation, understanding at last that the greatest mystery had been humanity itself, and that the end of our isolation was just the beginning of a much greater journey. Story 3. The Delphi Deception. Professor Thaddeus Wellesley grimaced as a bead of sweat trickled down his brow. The fierce Greek sun beat down mercilessly, baking the ancient stones of Delphi. He shaded his eyes, searching the sprawling ruins for any sign of his contact. 1,000 questions raced through his mind. What could be so important that one of the world's foremost experts on the oracle would summon him to Greece with such urgency and secrecy? At last, a figure emerged from the shadows of a crumbling temple. Dr. Eleni Stavros moved with the grace and authority of a woman who had spent her life unraveling the mysteries of this sacred place. Her usually bright eyes were shadowed with worry. "Thaddeus, thank the gods you've come," she said, grasping his hands in greeting. "I apologize for the cryptic message, but I had to be sure this wouldn't fall into the wrong hands." "Eleni, what's going on?" Thaddeus asked, his unease growing. "Your message said something about a final prophecy?" Eleni nodded gravely and reached into her satchel, pulling out a small clay jar. Its rough surface was covered in the looping script of ancient Greek. "A week ago, we uncovered this in a hidden chamber beneath the Temple of Apollo. It's a prophecy from the oracle herself, but not like any we've seen before. It foretells a great cataclysm that will consume the world in fire and blood, unless the chosen one can unravel the prophecy's riddle." Thaddeus felt his blood run cold. In all his years of research, he had never encountered anything like this. If Eleni was right, this could be the archaeological find of the millennium, or the harbinger of humanity's doom. "Let me see it," he said, reaching for the jar. But before his fingers could brush the ancient clay, a thunderous explosion rocked the ground beneath their feet. Screams of terror filled the air as tourists fled the site in panic. Through the chaos, Thaddeus glimpsed a group of armed men in black tactical gear stalking through the ruins, their faces obscured by dark ski masks. One of them leveled an assault rifle at Eleni and Thaddeus. "Hand over the jar now," he bellowed in heavily accented English. Thaddeus moved to shield Eleni, his mind racing. Who were these men, and how did they know about the prophecy? Eleni grabbed his arm, her eyes wide with fear. "Thaddeus, you have to take the jar. You're the only one who can decipher it. Go now." She shoved the priceless artifact into his hands and pushed him away as gunfire erupted around them. Thaddeus stumbled backwards, clutching the prophecy to his chest. He turned and sprinted for the site's exit, his heart hammering. As he ran, one thought crystallized in his mind with terrifying clarity. Whoever these dark forces were, they would not rest until they possessed the Oracle's final secret. And if they succeeded, the entire world would pay the price. Thaddeus raced through the winding streets of Delphi, his lungs burning with every desperate stride. The distant wail of sirens mingled with the shouts of his pursuers, spurring him on. He had to get to the rendezvous point Eleni had whispered to him before all hell broke loose. As he rounded a corner, a black SUV screeched to a halt beside him. The window rolled down, revealing a woman's face he'd never seen before. Her piercing blue eyes locked onto his. "Get in, Professor Wellesley." Quickly, Thaddeus hesitated for only a heartbeat before yanking open the door and diving inside. The woman floored the accelerator, sending them hurtling down the narrow street. "Who are you?" Thaddeus demanded, his fingers white-knuckled around the ancient jar. "Alexis Katsaros, Interpol," she replied curtly, weaving through traffic with expert precision. "Your friend Dr. Stavros contacted us last week. She feared something like this might happen." A cold knot formed in Thaddeus's stomach. "Is she?" Alexis's jaw tightened. "We don't know, but right now, our priority is keeping you and that prophecy out of enemy hands." Thaddeus stared down at the unassuming clay vessel in his lap. Could the faded etchings on its surface really hold the key to preventing a global catastrophe? And who exactly was trying to stop him from unraveling its secrets? As if in answer, a black motorcycle roared up alongside their vehicle. The helmeted rider raised a submachine gun and fired a burst through the SUV's back window. Alexis swerved hard, clipping the bike and sending the rider tumbling across the pavement. "Looks like the sons of Prometheus just joined the party," she growled. Thaddeus's eyes widened in recognition. He'd heard whispers of the shadowy cult that worshipped the Oracle as a dark goddess. They believed it was humanity's destiny to burn in the crucible of her prophecies, to be reborn as gods in the ashes of the old world. "We can't let them get the jar," he said urgently. "If the prophecy is true, then we're the only ones standing between the world and Armageddon." Alexis finished grimly. "Better strap in, Professor. It's going to be one hell of a ride." The SUV roared out of Delphi, leaving a trail of shattered glass and unanswered questions in its wake. Thaddeus felt the weight of the prophecy pressing down on him like a physical burden. Eleni had entrusted him with the fate of billions. He only prayed he would prove worthy of that trust. Miles away, in the ruins of the Temple of Apollo, a man in black tactical gear knelt beside the motionless body of Dr. Eleni Stavros. He pressed 2 fingers to her throat, feeling for a pulse. "The American has the jar," he said into his radio in clipped Greek. "And the woman?" A crackle of static, then a pity. "She could have been useful. No matter, we'll find Wellesley soon enough. The Oracle's secrets will be ours." The man stood, his eyes cold behind his ski mask. He gave Eleni's body one last dispassionate glance before melting back into the shadows. The sons of Prometheus had waited millennia for this moment. They could afford to be patient a little while longer. Thaddeus stared out the SUV's window at the sun-drenched Greek countryside, his mind reeling. Less than 24 hours ago, he'd been in his cozy Oxford office, blissfully unaware of the cosmic forces about to collide. Now here he was, caught between an ancient prophecy of doom and the machinations of a diabolical cult. He turned to Alexis, who was deftly navigating the winding coastal road. "What do you know about these sons of Prometheus?" She glanced at him sidelong, her blue eyes hard. "Religious fanatics with a serious messiah complex. They believe the oracle's final prophecy heralds the end times, and they intend to usher in the apocalypse themselves. Thaddeus felt his blood run cold. The jar suddenly seemed to burn against his palms, its secrets taunting him. Part of him wanted to hurl the wretched thing into the Aegean and be done with it, but a greater part knew he had no choice. If there was even a chance the prophecy was real, as if sensing his thoughts, Alexis reached over and squeezed his shoulder. "Hey, snap out of it, Professor. We're in this together now, and I don't know about you, but I'm not about let a bunch of crazy cultists bring about the end of the world." Despite the gravity of the situation, Thaddeus felt a small smile tug at his lips. Alexis's fierce resolve was oddly comforting. If he had to race against the clock to save humanity, there were worse partners to have at his side. Suddenly, a loud pop sounded from beneath the SUV's chassis. The vehicle swerved violently as Alexis fought to keep control. Damn it, they must have hit the tire. Up ahead, Thaddeus spotted a narrow dirt road snaking up into the hills, and beyond it, the unmistakable silhouette of an Orthodox monastery perched on a rocky outcropping. A crazy idea began to take shape in his mind. "There!" he shouted, pointing. "We can take shelter in the monastery. It's defensible, and the monks might even be able to help us translate the prophecy." Alexis shot him an incredulous look, but yanked the wheel hard to the right. The SUV lurched and bumped over the uneven terrain, the ancient building looming larger with every jarring meter. They skidded to a stop in a cloud of dust at the monastery gates. An elderly monk emerged, his weathered face creased in concern. "My children, what brings you to this holy place in such haste?" Thaddeus clambered out, the jar clutched protectively to his chest. He opened his mouth to explain, but the monk's eyes widened in recognition. "The vessel of the oracle," he breathed. "The time has come at last." Before Thaddeus could react, the screech of tires sounded behind them. He whirled to see a fleet of black SUVs racing up the narrow road, a familiar figure astride a motorcycle at their head. The monk beckoned urgently. "Quickly inside. The devil rides with them." Alexis and Thaddeus dashed through the gates as the first bullets pinged off the ancient stonework. The prophecy had led them here for a reason, Thaddeus was certain. But what secrets awaited them within these hallowed walls? And would they find the answers they sought before the sons of Prometheus brought the world to ruin? The gates slammed shut with a boom of finality, and the battle for the fate of humankind began in earnest. Story 4. The Ninth Legion's Path. Dr. Sarah Mitchell stood before the weathered stone tablet in the basement of Durham University's archaeology department, her fingers trembling as they traced the faint Latin inscription. After 15 years of searching for evidence of Rome's lost Ninth Legion, she couldn't believe what she was reading. The tablet, unearthed from a previously undiscovered chamber beneath Hadrian's Wall, told a story that defied everything historians thought they knew about the mysterious disappearance of the 5,000-strong legion in Britain around 120 AD. "This can't be right," she whispered, pushing her wire-rimmed glasses up her nose. The tablet spoke not of a military defeat or strategic retreat, but of something far more extraordinary, a doorway. A portal that appeared in the northern wilderness, described in terms that made Sarah's rational mind revolt. Her office phone rang, startling her from her reverie. "Dr. Mitchell speaking." "Sarah, it's Marcus." The voice of her colleague, Dr. Marcuschin, crackled with excitement. "You need to see what we found at the new dig site. Remember those anomalous energy readings I told you about? They're off the charts now." Sarah glanced at the tablet again. "I'm looking at something here that might be related. The inscription, it mentions a phenomenon that matches your readings almost exactly." "Well, then you're really going to want to see this. We've uncovered what appears to be a chamber, but the architecture, it's unlike anything I've ever seen." "And Sarah?" "The radiation signatures are identical to those recorded during the Aurora Borealis, except they're coming from underground." Within an hour, Sarah was driving north along the A1, the tablet carefully packed in her bag. The autumn countryside flew past in a blur of russet and gold, but her mind was elsewhere, piecing together the puzzle that had consumed her career. The Ninth Legion hadn't been destroyed by Celtic tribes as commonly believed. According to the tablet, they had encountered something far stranger in the wilds of northern Britain. The dig site was located in a remote valley, far from the usual tourist paths along Hadrian's Wall. As Sarah pulled up in her mud-splattered Land Rover, she saw Marcus waiting at the edge of the excavation, his usual composed demeanor replaced by barely contained excitement. "Look at this," he said without preamble, leading her to a steep trench. "The chamber's down there. We had to stop work because the instruments are going haywire." Sarah descended carefully into the trench, her boots slipping on the damp earth. The entrance to the chamber gaped before them, a perfect arch cut into the living rock. But it was the symbols carved around the archway that made her breath catch in her throat. They were an impossible combination of Latin military markings and something else, something that resembled quantum mechanical equations more than ancient text. "It gets stranger," Marcus said, shining his flashlight into the chamber. The beam illuminated walls covered in intricate patterns that seemed to shift and move in the light. "These patterns? They're generating their own electromagnetic field. And look at this." He pointed to a series of Roman numerals carved into the floor. "Legio 9 Hispana." "The 9th Hispanic Legion," Sarah translated unnecessarily, her heart pounding. She pulled the tablet from her bag and held it up to compare the inscriptions. "Marcus, this is it. This is what the tablet was describing. They found something here, something that changed everything they thought they knew about reality." As if in response to her words, a low hum began to emanate from the chamber, and the patterns on the walls began to pulse with a faint blue light. The electromagnetic sensors in Marcus's hand went wild, their displays spinning through impossible numbers. "Sarah," Marcus said slowly, "I think we need to call in some backup. This is way beyond archaeology now." But Sarah barely heard him. Her attention was fixed on a section of the wall where the shifting patterns had begun to coalesce into what looked like a doorway of pure light. The tablet had described this exact phenomenon, a portal that appeared to the 9th Legion 2 millennia ago, leading them not to defeat or desertion, but to a discovery that would rewrite history. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. The caller ID showed Dr. James Henderson, the quantum physicist she'd consulted about the energy readings months ago. "Sarah," he said without preamble when she answered, "those equations you sent me? They're not just similar to modern quantum mechanics. They're advanced versions of theories we're only beginning to understand. Whoever carved those symbols knew things about the structure of reality that we're just starting to figure out. This isn't just archaeology anymore. This is something else entirely." Sarah stared at the glowing patterns, remembering the tablet's final lines. "What we found beyond the wall was not the edge of empire, but the edge of everything we thought we knew. The door opens again when the stars align, as they did for us. We wait on the other side." The humming grew louder, and the light from the patterns intensified. Sarah felt a pull, not physical but something deeper, as if reality itself was bending around them. She thought of the 5,000 men of the 9th Legion, standing perhaps in this very spot, facing the unknown with courage and curiosity. "Marcus," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "call everyone you can think of. Physicists, historians, the military if you have to. But do it quickly, because if I'm reading this correctly, we have until moonrise before something extraordinary happens in this chamber. And we need to be ready." The patterns continued to shift and pulse, casting otherworldly shadows on the ancient walls. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the Northumberland hills, but the storm clouds gathering above were nothing compared to the tempest of discovery about to break. Inside the chamber, the air grew thick with static electricity as more researchers arrived on site. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a leading expert in quantum mechanics, stood beside Sarah, her instruments recording data that defied conventional physics. The patterns on the walls had evolved into complex, three-dimensional projections that seemed to float in midair. "These readings," Elena muttered, shaking her head in disbelief. "According to this, we're seeing localized space-time distortions. It's like the fabric of reality is being folded somehow." Sarah consulted the tablet again, her translation skills working overtime as she decoded more of the ancient text. The centurion who wrote this, he describes something similar. He says they spent days studying the phenomenon before the first soldier went through. "Went through?" Marcus asked sharply. "Through where?" Before Sarah could answer, A new voice joined the conversation. Through a quantum bridge, if I had to guess. Dr. James Henderson had arrived, his tweed jacket oddly out of place in the ancient chamber. The equations we're seeing here? They're describing what we'd now call an Einstein-Rosen bridge, a wormhole, in layman's terms. The humming from the walls reached a crescendo, and the light patterns began to spiral toward the center of the chamber. Sarah felt her hair stand on end as the air crackled with energy. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a section of the tablet. They mentioned a specific astronomical alignment. The stars are described as being in a particular configuration when the bridge becomes stable. Elena checked her watch. Moonrise is in 17 minutes. If these energy readings continue their current progression, she was interrupted by a sound like breaking glass, though nothing had shattered. The light patterns had coalesced into a perfect circle of brightness in the center of the chamber, hovering about 7 feet off the ground. "Nobody move," James ordered, though no one seemed inclined to. "We're seeing quantum fluctuations that shouldn't be possible under normal conditions." Sarah's mind raced as she compared the scene before her to the tablet's description. The Ninth Legion, they didn't just find this place by accident. Look at these markings, they were following something. Earlier discoveries, maps, calculations. But who made the calculations? Marcus wondered aloud. This level of understanding, it's thousands of years ahead of its time. A soft chime emanated from Elena's equipment. Energy levels are stabilizing. The quantum field it's forming a coherent structure. The circle of light had become a ring, and within it, they could see something. Not darkness, but not light either. It was as if they were looking at reality from an angle that shouldn't exist. Sarah found herself stepping forward, drawn by the same curiosity that must have driven the Roman legionaries 2,000 years ago. The tablet had more to say, much more, but the answers they sought clearly lay beyond that impossible doorway. "We need to establish safety protocols," James was saying. "Set up proper monitoring equipment, get government clearance." But Sarah's attention was caught by something else. Through the portal, for just a moment, she thought she saw movement. A flash of red, the exact shade of a Roman legion's cloak. "They're still there," she whispered. "The Ninth Legion, they're waiting for someone to follow them." The implications were staggering. If the Legion had indeed passed through this portal, if they had survived, they would have experienced time differently. Einstein's theories suggested as much. What had been 2,000 years for the rest of the world might have been mere months or years for them. Elena's instruments began beeping urgently. "The portal is stabilizing further. We're getting, wait, are those radio waves?" Indeed, through the static of their equipment, a pattern began to emerge. A signal, weak but clear, pulsing in a rhythm that Sarah recognized immediately. "It's Roman military code," she breathed. "They're sending us a message." The coded sequences continued, and Sarah translated them with trembling fingers. "To those who follow, we await you beyond the veil. What we have found must be shared. The door stands open. Come through." The choice before them was clear, though its implications were anything but. Step through into an unknown that had swallowed an entire Roman legion, or remain in the safety of the known world and let this discovery become just another historical mystery. Sarah looked at her colleagues, seeing the same mix of fear and excitement on their faces that she felt in her own heart. The Ninth Legion had made their choice 2 millennia ago. Now it was time for their successors to make theirs. The chamber had become a hub of frenzied activity. Military personnel arrived, setting up perimeters and equipment, while scientists frantically calibrated their instruments. But Sarah couldn't take her eyes off the portal, where that tantalizing glimpse of red had appeared. "We're picking up more transmissions," Elena announced, adjusting her receivers. "The signal's getting stronger." Sarah leaned over the equipment, translating as the coded messages came through. "Bring the key. The tablet is the key. Time flows differently here. Hurry." "Look at this," Marcus called out, pointing to a section of wall they hadn't noticed before. A rectangular depression, exactly the size of the tablet Sarah had found, was carved into the ancient stone. Sarah's hands shook as she removed the tablet from her back. "It's a perfect match," she said, studying the worn edges. "The Legion left this tablet as a message, but also as a key to return. Dr. Mitchell, a stern voice interrupted. Colonel Richards, the military officer in charge, stepped forward. I must advise against any attempt to interact further with the anomaly until we've conducted proper safety assessments. But Sarah was already moving toward the depression in the wall. With all due respect, Colonel, we have a direct line of communication with people who've been waiting 2,000 years for us to find them. I don't intend to make them wait any longer. Before anyone could stop her, she placed the tablet into the depression. It fit perfectly, and the effect was immediate. The humming intensified, and the portal's light shifted from white to a deep, pulsing blue. Through the portal, images began to appear more clearly. They could see what looked like a vast chamber, far larger than the one they stood in, filled with strange machinery that seemed to blend Roman engineering with something far more advanced. And there were people moving about, figures in Roman military dress, but also others in what appeared to be more modern clothing. The Ninth Legion, it seemed, hadn't been alone on the other side. "My God," James whispered, staring at his readings. "The space on the other side. It's not just a different location. It's operating under different physical laws entirely. The implications for physics, for our understanding of reality itself." More coded messages were coming through. "Faster now. The threshold is at full power. Safe passage guaranteed. We have so much to show you. 2,000 years of discovery. The answers to everything." Sarah took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. "I'm going through." "Dr. Mitchell." Colonel Richards moved to intercept her. "This is not a decision to be made lightly. We have no idea what's on the other side." "Actually, Colonel," she replied, pointing to her translations, "we do. We have thousands of Roman legionaries telling us exactly what's there. They've had 2 millennia to explore and understand it, and they're asking me, to join them." Elena stepped forward. "I'm going with you. These readings, they're revolutionary. Someone needs to document this properly." Marcus joined them. 3 is safer than 2. Besides, you'll need an archaeologist who isn't completely obsessed with the Ninth Legion, he added with a small smile at Sarah. Colonel Richards looked like he wanted to object further, but the portal was stabilizing even more, and the images from the other side were becoming crystal clear. They could see figures approaching the threshold from the other side. Men in Roman military dress, standing at attention, waiting. 20 minutes, Elena announced, checking her instruments. "Based on these readings, that's how long the portal will remain stable." Sarah nodded, securing her tablet computer and other essential equipment. "Then we have 20 minutes to take a step that will change human history forever." She approached the portal, its blue light washing over her. The humming had become a gentle pulse, almost like a heartbeat. Through the threshold, a Roman centurion stepped forward, snapping to attention. Even across 2 millennia and whatever space separated them, his bearing was unmistakable. "Legio 9 Hispana," he called out in clear Latin, "welcomes its brothers and sisters from across time." Sarah took a deep breath, looked back once at the chamber that connected present to past, and stepped forward into light that seemed to embrace her. She felt a moment of vertigo, a sensation of movement without moving, and then the transition was both instantaneous and eternal. Sarah felt as if her consciousness had been stretched across centuries, then snapped back into place like a rubber band. When her vision cleared, she found herself standing in a vast chamber that defied everything she thought she knew about ancient Roman engineering. The ceiling soared hundreds of feet overhead, supported by columns that seemed to be made of light itself. Ancient Roman architecture blended seamlessly with technology that appeared centuries ahead of anything on Earth. Screens of some crystalline material displayed data in both Latin and what appeared to be mathematical formulas that made Elena gasp in recognition. "Welcome," the centurion said in Latin, then switched perfectly to English. "I am Centurion Marcus Flavius Aquila. We have waited a very long time for this moment." Marcus and Elena emerged from the portal behind Sarah, their expressions mirroring her own awe. The chamber was filled with activity. Roman soldiers working alongside people in more modern dress, operating equipment that seemed to defy the laws of physics. "How?" Sarah managed to ask. "How is all this possible?" Centurion Aquila gestured to their surroundings. What you see before you is not just another place, Dr. Mitchell. It is a nexus point, one of several scattered throughout space and time. The ancients knew of them. The builders left them for us to find when we were ready. The builders? Elena asked, her scientific mind already racing with possibilities. Come, Aquila said, leading them deeper into the chamber. There is much to show you, and though time moves differently here, we must be efficient. They passed through areas that looked like research laboratories, libraries, and engineering workshops. Romans worked alongside what appeared to be people from various time periods, all engaged in studying and developing technologies that Sarah couldn't begin to comprehend. When we first discovered the portal, Aquila explained, we thought we had found a gateway to the gods. What we actually found was something far more profound, proof that humanity's destiny stretches far beyond what any of us imagined. They approached a central platform where a holographic display showed what looked like a map of the galaxy, but with strange connections and pathways marked between various points. The builders, Aquila continued, were not gods or aliens. They were us, humanity, from a future so distant that they had learned to fold space and time itself. They created these nexus points throughout history, gathering knowledge and preserving it for when it would be needed most. Sarah's mind reeled with the implications. You're saying that human beings from the future created these places? As some kind of temporal library? More than a library, Aquila corrected. A university, a research center, a gathering place for minds from across time. The Ninth Legion was not lost, Dr. Mitchell. We were recruited. Elena was studying the holographic display with intense concentration. These equations, they're solutions to problems we haven't even properly formulated yet. The implications for physics, for our understanding of the universe, are beyond revolutionary. Another voice joined in. A woman in what looked like 21st century clothing approached them. Dr. Sarah Mitchell? I'm Dr. Amanda Chun. I came through a similar portal in 2157. Sarah stared at her. 2157? But that's... The future, yes, Amanda smiled. Your future, specifically. I'm here because you're going to need my help understanding what comes next. You see, finding this place wasn't an accident. Nothing about this is an accident. The tablet, the chamber, your discovery, it's all part of a much larger pattern. The central chamber began to pulse with a new energy as Amanda led them to a circular platform embedded with symbols that Sarah recognized from both the tablet and her own research into quantum mechanics. Humanity, Amanda explained, activating a series of holographic displays, discovered something profound about the nature of consciousness and its relationship to space-time. The builders, our future selves, realized that certain moments in history were crucial nexus points, times when humanity stood on the precipice of tremendous change. The displays showed images from throughout history, the Library of Alexandria, the construction of Stonehenge, the rise and fall of civilizations. But they were overlaid with mathematical equations and energy patterns that seemed to connect them all. The Ninth Legion didn't just stumble upon this place, Aquila added. We were chosen, just as you were chosen, Dr. Mitchell. Your obsession with our disappearance wasn't random. It was engineered across time itself. Sarah's mind struggled to process the implications. But why? Why create all of this? Amanda's expression grew serious. Because humanity faces a crisis point, not just in your time, but in all times. The builders discovered that consciousness itself, human consciousness, is fundamental to the structure of reality. But something is coming, something that threatens not just our species, but the very fabric of space-time. She gestured, and the holographic display shifted to show what looked like tears in the universe itself, rifts in reality that seemed to consume everything around them. We call them void points, Amanda continued, places where consciousness itself begins to break down. They're spreading throughout time, threatening to unravel everything, past, present, and future. The builders created these nexus points to gather the greatest minds from throughout human history to work together to find a solution. Elena was studying the equations with growing concern. These patterns, they're showing exponential growth. How long do we have? That's the problem, Aquila said grimly. Time isn't linear here. The crisis is happening in all moments simultaneously. We're fighting a battle across the entire history of human consciousness. Sarah noticed something about the void point display. These patterns, they match the degradation I've been documenting in ancient sites around the world. The unexplained decay in monuments and artifacts. Yes, Amanda confirmed. What you've been seeing are the early signs of temporal decay. Reality itself is beginning to unravel, starting with the oldest human structures and spreading forward through time. But why bring us here now? Marcus asked, finally finding his voice. Why not just solve the problem in the future and be done with it? Because the solution requires something that only exists in fragments across time, Amanda explained. Human consciousness itself is the key, but not just from one time period. We need the combined understanding of humanity throughout its history, from the ancient wisdom of Rome to the quantum theories of your time and beyond. The chamber suddenly shuddered, and the holographic displays flickered. Alarms began to sound throughout the complex. Another void point is forming, Aquila announced, checking readings on a nearby console. This one's forming near the temporal coordinate of your entry point, which means we have a choice to make, Amanda said, turning to Sarah and her colleagues. You can return to your time now, pretend this never happened, or you can join us, become part of humanity's greatest collaboration across time itself. Sarah looked at the displays showing the spreading void points, then at her colleagues. She thought of all the mysteries she'd studied throughout her career, all pointing to this moment. What do you need us to do? Amanda's face showed relief at Sarah's response. She quickly led them to a vast circular chamber where hundreds of people from different time periods worked at stations that seemed to blend technology from every era of human history. This is the Temporal Coordination Center, she explained. Every discovery, every breakthrough humanity has ever made is being analyzed and recombined here. We believe the void points are actually symptoms of a larger problem, a fundamental disconnection between human consciousness and the fabric of reality itself. Sarah watched as a Roman engineer worked seamlessly with what appeared to be a quantum physicist from the 22nd century, their combined knowledge producing calculations that flowed across crystalline screens in streams of light. Your expertise in ancient languages and patterns isn't just academic, Sarah, Amanda continued. The ancients understood something about consciousness that we lost over time. Their symbols, their monuments, they weren't just recording history. They were recording the fundamental patterns of reality itself. A new alarm blared through the chamber. The holographic displays showed another void point forming, this one larger than any they'd seen before. It's accelerating, Elena said, studying the readings. The decay is spreading faster than your models predicted. Centurion Aquila approached with a grim expression. The void point near your entry temporal coordinate is growing. If it continues at this rate, it will sever the connection to your time within hours. Then we need to work fast, Sarah said, already moving to one of the research stations. Show me everything you have on ancient consciousness patterns. Elena, start integrating your quantum mechanics knowledge with their temporal mathematics. Marcus, we need your archaeological expertise to identify any patterns we might have missed. The next few hours were a blur of discovery and revelation. Sarah found herself decoding ancient texts that suddenly made perfect sense when viewed through the lens of quantum mathematics. The symbols she'd spent her career studying weren't just writing. They were equations describing the fundamental nature of consciousness itself. Look at this, she called out, pointing to a pattern that repeated across civilizations. It's not just similar, it's identical. The same mathematical relationship shows up in Egyptian hieroglyphs, Sumerian cuneiform, and even prehistoric cave paintings. They were all describing the same thing. Elena's eyes widened as she made the connection. The quantum entanglement patterns we've been studying, they match perfectly. The ancients were describing quantum consciousness relationships, just using different symbols. But even as they made breakthroughs, the situation grew more dire. More void points were appearing across time, threatening to unravel the very fabric of history itself. We're running out of time, Amanda announced, her voice tense. The void point near your temporal entry point is becoming critical. If we don't find a solution soon, you won't be able to return to your own time. And worse, your entire timeline could be erased. Sarah looked up from her work, a terrible realization dawning. What if that's the point? What if we're not supposed to go back? The chamber fell silent as Sarah's words hung in the air. She stood up from her station, her mind racing with the implications of what she discovered. "Look at these patterns," she said, gesturing to the ancient symbols flowing across her screen. "They're not just describing consciousness, they're describing a transformation. Every ancient culture was recording the same prophecy, the same inevitable change in human consciousness." Amanda's eyes widened with understanding. The void points, they're not destroying reality. They're transforming it. "Exactly," Sarah continued, her voice growing more excited. "The builders didn't create these nexus points to prevent something from happening. They created them to ensure it happens correctly. This is why they needed minds from throughout human history, not to stop the transformation, but to guide it." Elena's fingers flew across her console, running new calculations. "The quantum patterns, they're not showing decay. They're showing evolution. The fabric of reality isn't unraveling. It's reorganizing itself around a new form of consciousness." The chamber shuddered again. But this time, Sarah viewed the disturbance with new understanding. The void points weren't tears in reality. They were windows into what reality was becoming. "The Ninth Legion," Centurion Achilles said slowly, "we weren't just recruited to help solve a crisis. We were brought here to be part of the transformation itself." Amanda nodded, pulling up new displays. "Every person brought to this nexus, from every time period, we're not just researchers. We're catalysts. Our combined consciousness, our understanding across time. It's all part of the process." Marcus, who had been quietly studying ancient architectural plans, suddenly spoke up. "The monuments, Stonehenge, the pyramids, all of them. They weren't just buildings. They were preparation sites. Humanity has been preparing for this moment for thousands of years." The void point near their temporal entry point had grown massive, but now Sarah could see it wasn't a void at all. It was a doorway, just like all the ancient portals and mysterious gates that humanity had built throughout history. "We don't go back," she said firmly. "We go forward." The builders knew that humanity would reach a point where consciousness itself would evolve. They created these nexus points not to prevent it, but to ensure that when it happened, we would have the combined wisdom of all human history to guide us through. The chamber's energy began to pulse in a new rhythm, as if responding to their understanding. The supposed void points were synchronizing, creating a network of transformation across time itself. "But what happens to our time periods?" Elena asked. "To all of history?" Amanda smiled. "They become part of something greater." The builders didn't just create a university across time. They created an incubator for the next stage of human consciousness. Every person here, every piece of knowledge we've gathered, it's all coming together for this moment. The chamber's light began to shift, taking on a quality that seemed to exist beyond normal human perception. Sarah could feel her consciousness expanding, connecting with the others in the chamber in ways that transcended ordinary understanding. "This is what the ancient texts were really describing," she said, watching as new patterns of reality began to form around them. "Not the end of humanity, but its transformation. We're not just solving a crisis, we're becoming something new." The transformation began subtly at first. Sarah noticed that she could perceive the thoughts and consciousness of others in the chamber not as words or images, but as direct understanding. The barriers between individual minds were becoming permeable, yet each person retained their unique identity and perspective. "It's like everything humanity has ever learned or experienced is coming together," she said, though she wasn't sure if she spoke the words aloud or simply shared the thought. Every discovery, every piece of wisdom, every moment of human understanding. The chamber itself was changing, its physical structure becoming more fluid, more responsive to the collective consciousness forming within it. The technology that had seemed so advanced moments ago now appeared as natural as breathing, not because it had changed, but because their understanding had evolved to encompass it. Centurion Achilles' presence resonated with 2,000 years of accumulated knowledge, his experiences in the Nexus merging with their expanding awareness. "This is what we were preparing for," his thoughts echoed. "Not just the Ninth Legion, but all of humanity, every civilization, every culture, building toward this moment." Elena's scientific understanding provided a framework for what was happening. The quantum entanglement of consciousness was creating a new layer of reality, one where thought and physical existence were no longer separate. The void points were windows into this new state of being, portals through which transformed consciousness could flow. The holographic displays now seemed redundant. They could all perceive the patterns of transformation directly. The network of nexus points across time was creating a lattice of evolved consciousness, a new structure of reality that encompassed all of human history while transcending its limitations. "Look," Marcus projected, directing their attention to the changing fabric of space-time around them. The physical chamber was becoming transparent, revealing the true nature of the nexus, a point of convergence not just in space and time, but in the evolution of human consciousness itself. Amanda's future knowledge helped them understand the scope of what was happening. The builders knew that this transformation would require the full spectrum of human experience. The scientific understanding of our time, the wisdom of the ancients, the accumulated knowledge of every age, all of it necessary for this metamorphosis. Sarah could feel her consciousness expanding beyond the chamber, beyond the nexus, touching minds across time and space. She understood now why the ancient monuments had been built, why certain knowledge had been preserved through the ages. It wasn't just about recording history or predicting the future. It was about preparing humanity for this moment of transcendence. The supposed void point near their entry timeline was now revealed as what it truly was, not a destructive force, but a birth canal for a new form of existence. The combined consciousness of humanity was creating something that had never existed before, yet had been inevitable since the first human looked up at the stars and wondered. "We're not ending human history," Sarah realized. "We're fulfilling it. Everything we've ever built, discovered, or dreamed, it was all leading to this." The transformation reached a crescendo. The boundaries between times, between minds, between matter and consciousness became fluid. Yet within this fluidity, each individual perspective remained distinct, enriching the whole without being lost within it. The chamber filled with a light that seemed to emanate from consciousness itself. Physical forms began to shift as human awareness expanded into new dimensions of existence. Sarah could perceive every person in the nexus not just as they were now, but as they had been throughout their lives, and as they would become in this new state of being. "It's beautiful." Elena's thoughts resonated through the collective consciousness. The mathematics of it, it's perfect. Every equation, every theory we ever developed was just a glimpse of this larger pattern. The transformation accelerated. The void points were no longer separate phenomena, but had merged into a single, continuous evolution of reality itself. Through their expanded awareness, they could perceive how this change was affecting all of human history simultaneously, not destroying it, but elevating it into a new form of existence. Sarah understood now why she had been drawn to study ancient mysteries her entire life. Those mysteries weren't just historical puzzles, they were breadcrumbs left by the builders, guiding humanity toward this moment of transformation. Every archaeological dig, every decoded inscription, every ancient wonder had been preparing her for this understanding. The Ninth Legion story finally made complete sense. They hadn't been lost. They had been the first to glimpse humanity's true destiny. Their disappearance from history hadn't been a tragedy, but a necessary step in this grand evolution. Through their shared consciousness, Sarah could feel the presence of countless others being drawn into the transformation. Not just those in the Nexus, but minds from throughout human history, all connecting in this moment of transcendence. The barriers between past, present, and future dissolved as human consciousness expanded to encompass all of time simultaneously. This is what the builders knew would happen. Amanda's understanding flowed through their collective awareness. Not an ending, but a beginning. Humanity isn't just changing, it's becoming what it was always meant to be. The physical structure of the Nexus began to merge with their transformed consciousness, the distinction between mind and matter becoming meaningless in this new state of existence. They were becoming something that could perceive and interact with reality in ways their former selves could barely imagine. Sarah felt a final surge of transformation washing through their collective consciousness. The last vestiges of their limited physical existence gave way to something greater, a form of being that could traverse time and space as easily as thought, that could perceive the underlying patterns of reality directly. The void points, now fully revealed as windows into this new state of existence, pulsed with the rhythm of transformed consciousness. The separate streams of human history were weaving together into a tapestry of unified awareness, each thread retaining its unique character while contributing to something far greater than the sum of its parts. We are becoming, Sarah's thoughts rippled through the collective consciousness, what humanity was always destined to become. Stop. The collective consciousness that had once been Sarah Mitchell, along with her colleagues, the Ninth Legion, and countless others throughout human history, emerged into their new state of being. They existed now as part of a vast tapestry of evolved human consciousness, able to perceive and interact with all of time and space simultaneously. Through their expanded awareness, they could see how every mystery, every monument, every moment of human discovery had been leading to this transformation. The ancient structures that had fascinated Sarah throughout her career now revealed their true purpose, not just as buildings or markers, but as nodes in a vast network preparing humanity for this evolution. The void points, fully merged into the new fabric of reality, had become permanent gateways through which transformed consciousness could flow freely across time and space. The nexus points created by the builders served as anchors for this new state of existence, ensuring that the transformation encompassed all of human history without destroying it. The Ninth Legion's disappearance, Sarah's lifelong obsession with ancient mysteries, Elena's quantum research, and Marcus's archaeological insights, all had been necessary pieces of this cosmic puzzle. Each person's unique perspective and knowledge contributed to the greater whole, creating a form of existence that preserved individual identity while transcending the limitations of singular consciousness. We are the fulfillment of humanity's destiny, the thought rippled through their collective awareness. Not the end of human history, but its ultimate purpose. And in that moment of complete understanding, the transformation was complete. Humanity had become what it was always meant to be, not bound by time or space, not limited by physical form, but free to explore and experience the universe in ways their former selves could never have imagined. The builder's grand design was fulfilled, and a new chapter in the story of consciousness had begun.